Are you a lover of all things cute and cuddly? Do you believe in making a difference in the lives of those who need it most? Kitten Rescue NW, a local kitten rescue based in San Antonio, Texas, run by a group of dedicated individuals who have poured their hearts and retirement savings into saving these precious little lives. But they can't do it alone. With overfilled fosters and a growing number of cats and kittens in need, they're reaching out for your help. From April 21st to May 4th, join us in our mission to raise funds for the kitten rescue. Your donation will go directly to supporting the construction of their new facility, providing a safe haven for these furry friends. Every dollar counts. Help support the rescue through ko-fi.com/kittenrescuenw, or you can always go directly to kittenrescuenw.org. Together, we can make a difference. And if you're looking to expand your family, Kitten Rescue Northwest offers adoptions to any city in the U.S. with Southwest Airlines access. These little furballs are ready to find their forever homes. So join the cause, stream, donate, adopt, and spread the word along with the night shift. Together, let's get these kittens the love and care they deserve. We were plunged once more into darkness. The curator and I, my only guide, once again, the echoing sound of his footsteps just ahead of me, strolling confidently. I was tired, emotionally and physically, but I followed dutifully, unwilling to be left to the devices of the museum. It's not good, is it? I could have laughed at the question, as absurd as it seemed in that moment. It's horrible, I answered. The curator let out a sigh as though he was afraid that might be my answer. It wasn't always this way. Finally, I thought I might get some answers. And then I slipped. I thought my feet were sliding due to the residue of Humphrey's head on my sneakers, but as I lost my footing entirely and my hands made contact with the floor, I realized I was very wrong. The first thing I noticed was how moist it was. Not like something had spilled as my hands pressed into it. There was give, and more liquid seeped up between my fingers. I stood up carefully, trying to steady myself on the slippery surface. I could feel the wet patches on my pants where my knees had made contact. I hadn't noticed until then, but the air in this darkened hallway was stale, foul, and hot, and there seemed to be a constant breeze blowing against us. So we were walking against the wind. And if I had held very, very still, I could feel it. A slight rhythmic rising and falling like the swinging of a ship. Respiratory. I couldn't see it, but I knew what surrounded the curator and I. The warm, wet, bronchial flesh of lungs, expanding and contracting to match the breath of a beast of a creature. You all right? The curator's voice asked, some feet ahead of me. I didn't know how to even begin to answer the question. Respiratory takes some getting used to, but it gives us a nice time to chat. A nice time. What the hell's going on here? Why am I here? What? Why? This used to be a lovely place, Mr. Singer. Breaks my heart what happened to it. And thus, the curator finally began to tell me the sorry tale of the Habitsville Heart Museum. Long ago, the Habitsville Heart Museum sat where it was meant to, in the center of Habitsville, back when the shops this side of town were a main street, bustling with activity. The Habitsville Heart Museum was a popular spot for visitors back when strangers came into town and were welcomed in. Before Habitsville became what it is. The curator isn't sure what happened, or if there was any one cause, but gradually the businesses around the museum started closing down. The ice cream parlor, the hat shop, and the number of boarded-up shacks I passed on my way to the square where the museum now resides. The town grew, but it grew inwards. Visitors no longer stumbled into town, and the permanent residents no longer wanted to be close to Habitsville history. In fact, they seemed to want to know as little about the town as possible. They built bakeries and tailors and groceries, newspaper offices, as a shell around the old main street around the museum. A living tomb. It makes sense to me now, but when the curator first told me, I wasn't especially receptive. You're joking, right? You're telling me that everything, the missing people's portraits, the brick walls, and who knows what else in this place, it's all because the museum's business has been down? The museum is lonely, Mr. Singer. And when a creature of its age and nature is upset, it lashes out. He explained away the carnage like a parent making excuses for a poorly behaved child. The sticky wind continued to wail against my face, tasting rotten in my mouth and burning my nose. Okay. Fine, it's lonely. What am I supposed to do about it? I'm an old man, Mr. Singer. The curator's voice drifted back to me. I have no children, no living heirs, no one I trust. I haven't a soul to leave the museum to when I'm gone, and it requires very specific care. It took only a moment for me to understand what he was saying. Surely you're not asking me to take your place. The curator's voice was steady, firm, nearing parental with me too. I'm not asking, Samuel. This is something you must do. For the good of Habitsville. The museum needs visitors. At that, I stopped walking. Surely he wasn't saying what I thought he was. I can't bring people here. This thing will tear them apart. This time, the curator's footsteps stopped with mine. It's tear apart a person here or there, or tear apart the town, Samuel. What you've seen here today has been difficult for you, I know. But I assure you, it is nothing compared to what the museum can do. It gives us a gift with this restraint. Don't take it for granted. Dread built in my chest, but something else too. An aching sadness. This was a responsibility I didn't ask for, but was it one I could turn away from? The sensation in my chest built, the back of my throat constricting. I won't do it, I said. But my voice sounded strangled and cracked. The sadness intensified, my lower lip trembled. Was I about to... Suddenly, my abrupt melancholy was interrupted by the sensation of falling. I fell to my knees again, and I heard a similar splash, as the curator must have also hit the slick surface of the hall. He cursed as the floor rose again. Not gradually, but in a sharp movement upwards before shuddering back over and over again. The breath through the tunnel picked up as well, whistling dissonant tones over one another in a haunting drone. Over the din, the curator's voice shouted at me. I hope you're happy. It's crying. The journey to the far end of the respiratory department was a daunting one, and by the end, both the curator and I was soaked to the bone in pneumatic fluid, and dizzy from being tossed around by the museum's sobs. But eventually we did reach a door at the end of the tunnel, and my eyes immediately flitted to the plaque above it, nailed into the fleshy wall. Neurological. We paused for just a moment before the door. The sadness in my chest was subsiding into a dull ache, and the spasm of the tunnel was only slight tremors. We moved through emotions and approached logic. The curator said quietly, I suggest you do the same, Mr. Singer. I only glared at him. He had to know there was nothing logical about this. But I didn't stop him as he opened the door, and we both stepped through. The room, if I could call it a room, was a vignette. Its edges were murky, rippling in thick darkness, indiscernible. It could have been the size of a closet or a parking lot. There was no way to know. The curator stepped in confidently, hands clasped neatly behind his back. He walked forward under the single light that hung from the ceiling, a cage-white light bulb larger than any I'd ever seen, even in street lamps. It flickered and made a light zapping sound each time the light spiked. I kept expecting to see the edges of the room, furniture, or anything, but even the surges of electricity revealed nothing. "Stay there, Mr. Singer," the curator spoke as he walked, and I stopped. He walked only a few more feet, and as he did, the darkness rescinded. Not like fog dissipating, like a 1,000 thick tendrils tangled together, sinking back into the sea. They crept back in time with the curator's steps until finally an object was uncovered. "Do you paint much, Sam?" The curator stood in front of a canvas suspended on an easel. Brushes rested on the ledge. "No, not really," I stammered. "Maybe a bit when I was a kid. My mother liked to paint." The curator turned back to face me, a wistful smile on his face. "Really? So did mine." He turned back to the canvas, letting his finger trace along the edge. His smile fell. "I do hope you can help the museum, Sam." He turned to me, the zapping of the light bulb overhead illuminating his face ghoulishly, the shadows dancing harshly against the lines of his face. "I told you I can't," I started to say, but the curator just shook his head, oddly peaceful. "Please, if we could just get out of here, maybe once we're outside, we could find a way." "You're pleading with me like I'm your captor, Sam. We're merely two ships weathering the same storm. The sea doesn't bargain." As he spoke, I could feel it. The beating in my chest starting to quicken. At first it was a relief, the pace of the pulse finally fitting more accurately to my own, not fighting against it just for a moment, but then it quickly surpassed the realm of comfort. It was hammering against my ribs, and I knew the curator could feel it too because we were doubling over at once, hands clutching our chests. I've never had a heart attack. I'm young enough to have the luxury of not giving them much thought. But this is how I imagine it to feel, a rodent running wild in your ribcage, flurried and reckless, pulling at individual arteries, digging a home in your heart's chambers. The large light bulb over the canvas began to flicker even brighter as the curator and I fell to the floor, gasping for air. My vision began to blur, and I could see at the edge of the light there was nothing. Beyond the darkness and the flickers of lightning, there seemed to be nothing but swirling black in the room. Perhaps nothing but darkness awaited me at all. The curator's twisted face came in and out of focus, thrashing violently, saliva dripping down his cheeks and chin and pooling on the floor. A desperate, animalistic expression on his face. His lips were pulsing, sputtering the same choking sound over and over, a sort of spit flecking with each utterance. I shut my eyes. I didn't want that to be the last thing I saw. And then the moment eased. Sore and raw, my heart began to settle back into a survivable rhythm. I left my eyes closed as it settled, in case the sense of relief was merely death. But eventually I felt the ache radiating through my chest, and I knew this couldn't be death. Surely this pain didn't follow me to the other side. So I opened my eyes. Everything was as it had been. The darkness still rippled at the edge of the room. The light bulb overhead buzzing steadily, its light shining down on the blank canvas and brushes. And the curator. I knew from a distance that he was too still. When my eyes were able to focus, I could see that his jaw was slack, no longer sputtering. His eyes still open. There were red blood vessels having broken from the pressure of his pulse. I wondered absently if mine looked the same. I crawled over to him, still weak and trembling violently. "Hey," I choked, my voice barely a whisper. I shook him gently. "Hey." "Hey," I repeated stupidly. I realized I didn't know the man's name. His head rolled loosely, but I knew it wouldn't be long before rigor mortis kicked in. The curator was dead. The curator's corpse stared at me. "What now?" I asked it quietly, with no answer, of course. I looked around the room at the rippling corners of what I could see. "What now?" I asked louder, a bit of anger seeping in past the numbness. "What do you want now?" I yelled at the museum, my voice echoing. The light bulb overhead buzzed loudly, the illumination bringing my attention once more to the canvas in the corner of the room. Pa. Perhaps the curator's final sputters weren't the nonsense of a dying man. This was a guided tour, after all. He managed to get out one last direction before his life's work killed him. It took everything I had to stand up. I staggered forward, closing the distance between myself and the easel. I dragged one foot, then another, over the body of the curator. I studied myself on the wood of the frame and looked at the tools before me. Blank canvas, a medium-tipped brush. A choked laugh surprised me when it emerged from my throat. "There's no paint," I muttered. Then louder, "There's no paint!" I laughed more, a spastic nature hurting my already burning chest. The curator was dead. I was soaked with slowly dying pneumatic fluid. I had to create a piece of art to appease a sentient museum. The thing hadn't given me anything to work with. At that moment, it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. A sound broke me from my delirium. It was scraping sounds from somewhere deep in the surrounding blackness. As I watched, something emerged from the swirling murk, grounding me painfully back in the reality of my situation. It was a hand. Well, it was a series of hands, clasping onto one another to form a long string. Though it only appeared in a quick burst, I could see that the entire length of it was at least 10 feet. And the hands were all varying stages of decay. Some only bone, some were mottled flesh. The one on the very end was relatively fresh. I could see the veins connecting to nothing. Flex as the structure came sweeping forward and clasped itself around the curator's ankle. I said nothing. Did nothing. As a long tail of limbs dragged the body of the curator into the darkness beyond like a beast, bringing prey back to its den. I suddenly felt quite small. There was nothing to hide within the aura of the light overhead, and I couldn't possibly run into the darkness. Especially after that, I was frozen. A sitting duck. From the depths there were noises, cracking, wet slaps and tearing, grinding, squelches and splatters. I couldn't say the words, hear what it was to hear those sounds. But I can say that when it stopped, mercifully stopped, the scraping of the hands came again. This time from my left, I braced myself to feel my weight being pulled out from under me, a grip around my ankle. You may call me a coward, but I shut my eyes again. And then I heard the slithering recede. I opened one eye, then another. The hands were nowhere to be seen, and I realized what it had been doing. It was giving me paint. Before me was a simple palette, wooden like the easel, containing several shades color. They were earth tones, all scarlet, burnt orange, and clay. I could tell the brightest red was pure blood. The white ground bone and marrow fragments floating to the top. I picked up the palette, my hands trembling violently. The whiff of rotten rust burned my nostrils along with a strong, acrid scent coming from the yellow. Stomach bile, I assumed. And a sort of salt and pepper brown mixed with a clear, viscous fluid in a shade I recognized. I looked back to the spot on the floor where the curator's body had lain. Vomit bit at the back of my throat. I couldn't let myself think about what exactly had happened in the darkness beyond. Instead, I picked up the palette, holding it far away from my face, and then picked up the brush. I stood in front of the blank canvas. The tendrils of black rippled around me, and I could feel my heart rate quicken. The museum was excited. So I began to paint. I'm not much of an artist. As a journalist, I create pictures with words. I knew whatever the museum wanted, it wasn't going to be the best approximation of a classic landscape. Something technical, intellectual, though. This was the neurological division. This is the Habitsville Heart Museum. So I painted from my bruised, aching heart. I don't recall how much time passed. The paint wasn't very cooperative, bits of hair and bone shard getting embedded into the canvas. The bile took ages to dry, but eventually a picture took shape. Technically abysmal. Yet when I finally stepped back and revealed my work, I felt my pulse finally settle. I could feel the curiosity of the museum peak, and then it settled into something else. It almost felt like when I cried in the respiratory, but different. This was a longing, yearning sort of sadness. I painted a memory. It seemed fitting for the neurological department. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a paper before me, cheap paint scattered about. I had it all over my fingers, my brow furrowed in concentration as I painted. The son in the corner of my work, my mother behind me, looking over my shoulder. A soft smile on her face. I couldn't be certain, but I believe that's the last time I remember painting. I used to really enjoy painting, I said to the darkness, uncertain. I'm not sure why I stopped. The darkness rippled, the emotion undetectable, and then something unexpected happened. About 15 feet away, a light turned on. At first I was frightened, though I hated the darkness around me. What horrors could illumination reveal? But as I looked, I was surprised. I began to walk gingerly towards the newly spotted light. As I approached, I could see there were paintings, not portraits, from the first room that I had entered with the curator. These were snapshots of random expressions, and the smell of rot and flesh was drifted from each canvas. They were depictions of a Habitsville I had never seen before. Bright, happy, charming cobblestone streets, children peering in shop windows, and so many that I recognized as being inside the museum. One in particular, right below the hanging light bulb above, as though given a spotlight just for me to see. A woman holding her child up to see the art displayed on the museum wall. I gazed at these for a while, taking them all in, and then, with a brief buzz, another light came on. This time, back behind me, past the canvas, on the far side of the room. Under that illumination, I found more paintings in the same style, painted by the same hand, with the same type of subject. Nostalgic content, bustling, joyful. We continued like this, the museum and I, lights turning on one by one until the entire room, a huge grand hall, was lit in bright light. And the museum's art was revealed. I examined the final painting with care, then looked around the room, aghast with what I was seeing. These, I paused, speaking carefully, these are lovely. I could feel the museum's pride bubbling up within me, my heart beating with a little more strength. I decided to push my luck a bit further. It's a shame no one gets to see them. That too, I felt in the museum's emotions. A sadness weighing the both of us down. What you've painted here, it's not really what Habitsville is anymore, I said. I felt the museum's mood dip even further. It's changed a bit out there. It seems like maybe you've been away for a while. An even sharper dip in mood. I could feel anger stirring beneath my own skin, tears biting at the corner of my eyes. Maybe it's time you came back. I said it tentatively, nearly holding my breath. I knew what I was saying was insane, that I should be cursing the museum and all of its horrors, using every spare moment for escape, but the sharing of our heartbeats revealed in me an empathy I didn't know I had. I could feel the complexity of this creature, how bitter its loneliness. The museum had paused as though considering what I was suggesting. Then the entire building tilted. The breathing was knocking from my lungs as I was flung across the room, colliding hard with the sharp corners of canvases and frames. I was being thrown about violently in a rhythmic torrent of movement, right to left and back. I knew better than to think it an earthquake. An ornate wooden frame cracked beneath my chin, blood seeping from a new wound and spattering against the paintings closest to me, adding red poppies to rolling fields, roses to gardens, and then as quickly as it began, the movement ceased. I sat up, emerging from the pile of art. Despite the harsh rocking, the majority of it was unharmed. I held the collar of my shirt against the wound on my chin to stop the bleeding and looked around. There, on the far corner of the room, the last corner to be illuminated, was a staircase. I climbed quickly over the scattered art, careful not to damage any as I went. I reached the stairs and climbed up them, taking one last look at the chaos below. Knowing that somewhere, buried beneath the others, was my own piece. Mine and the curator's. At the top of the staircase was a door with a plate above it. Lobby. I could have cried. I pushed open the door, and there I was, back where I had begun. It was disheveled now, much of the art fallen off the walls, sculptures shattered into chunks on the floor. In the center, the security system had also been turned to ruins. Monitors toppled over, displaying nothing but static. A head popped up behind the desk. Kimberly, the security guard, her wild hair no longer contained beneath a cap, a bruise on her cheek. "Has something happened?" she asked. I didn't know how to answer. She looked around and then back at me. "Where's the curator?" I didn't know how to answer that either. Instead, I walked towards the large oak desk at the front of the building, my heart thrumming in my chest at a steady pace. Neither too fast nor too slow. I wondered if I'd finally regained my freedom, or if I perhaps now felt as the museum did, in harmony. I pulled open the door. I took a few slow steps out and was immediately assaulted with a sound I hadn't expected. People. There was a crowd of people around the building, staring amazed at the museum. It took a few moments for me to realize we were no longer in the secluded square, past the hat shop and the ice cream parlor encased in brick walls. The museum, incredibly, impossibly, had moved. Well, not just moved, but settled itself right on Habitsville's main strip. I took a few more steps out. Another thing became clear to me. The museum hadn't waited for a vacancy to open up in the street. Instead, it had planted itself directly onto another building. If memory served, it was an apartment complex. Rubble surrounded the edges of the museum, and blood seeped out from its foundation. And yet, my heart soared. I felt elated. No longer was the museum trapped within these brick walls. No longer did it only have its own twisted heart for company. There were people. People. A rhythm filled the street as the hearts of Habitsville citizens settled into one pulse. And one by one, the people entered the Habitsville Heart Museum. It had straightened itself up instantaneously, tidied the wreckage of the move. I watched as the citizens of Habitsville roamed the lobby, speculated as the first few chose their passages, some to respiratory, to muscular, circulatory. I wasn't frightened for them. The museum's rage, its fear, its loneliness, it was gone. There in the center of the lobby, protected with velvet rope, was a familiar piece. Mine. Of a boy painting with his mother. I walked over to it. It had been varnished with some kind of shining chemical, and the stench of death no longer hung around it. A piece of admiration for the curator. There were footsteps beside me. "I can't see," the small voice said. "Hold on," a woman's voice answered. It was a young mother, chasing after a boy who had scampered into the museum. He had stopped before my painting, standing on his tiptoes, trying to see. His mother approached, swept him up into her arms. "There," she said lovingly. "Do you see now?" I saw. And I would continue to see as I visited the Habits Heart Museum whenever I could. There were new pieces constantly. Depictions of modern-day Habitsville mixed in with the paintings of a forgotten town. And sometimes, if I was feeling creative or lonely, or any of those things, I could go to the very heart of the Habitsville Heart Museum. To the room and coronary that was closed to the public, that was once filled with hundreds of rotting portraits. Then I would find a canvas there, and brushes, and paint, real paint. And I would put the colors to canvas. And I would think of the curator. Think of his mother. Think of mine. The only sound, 1,000 hearts beating as one. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I want to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video. I want to give a huge thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. This past year has been rough. I've been gone for quite a while trying to get things organized for my own life, and Patreon subscribers, you guys who subscribe everywhere, this has kept me afloat in turbulent waters. So I want to give a very special thank you to Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, Disciple, Strategy Wolf Emoji, SullyMan, Brandon Mendoza, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna LaQueda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Djenna, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, Mephistopheles, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jesus Cornejo, Yarghoul, VerbalHorror, Amber Clark, J. Kearns, Mike, Himbo Jerry, Crusader Chocobo, Corbin Dallas, Estebean, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Cryolinian, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Dirt Diver 030, Voice of Sand, Psychomel, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, William King, Sashi Suzaku, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. To all you guys and everybody who's included in the description down below, thank you so much for everything that you guys have done for me, and thank you so much for being here when times get difficult and I can't always be around to make content. I really appreciate your support, and I cannot thank you enough. And that goes to everybody who watches these videos, that goes to everybody who's subbed here, and anybody who has ever liked a creepypasta story ever. I wish you all the best. Sweet dreams.